Thank you so much for joining us for today's kickoff of this year's Wye Oak Lecture Series. We've changed the format a little bit. You might remember, if you've been to ones in the past, that it was an weekday evening event, and we really wanted to be able to attract a broader audience. And so we've shifted this year's lectures to this Saturday late morning format. We also appreciate your efforts in getting here. I know it was no small feat getting through the Baltimore Running Festival. But we're just so excited to kick off this year's series with Dr. Jonathan Michael Square. He's going to be talking to us about not just the livery that we have lent to the Met's exhibition Superfine. We never imagined it would be quite the centerpiece of the show that it has been. It's been gratifying. We have an instructor with the Baltimore School for the Arts who used it as a jumping off point for an assignment. If you're interested in that more deeply, you might connect with Nora Worthington here in the second row afterwards. But I wanted to sort of set this up. I guess I should introduce myself first. My name is Catherine Arthur, and I am the VP of Collections and Chief Curator here at MCHC. I began my career here as an intern many years ago, worked here early career before leaving to attend graduate school, and I returned to staff in 2023. And it's really, this collection is just the most amazing thing. There is so much that remains to be discovered about it. And so in particular, with this livery, I think that it's noteworthy. I'll leave the details of the actual, more of the story of the livery to Dr. Square. But it was given to our collection in 1946. And at that time, and even today, provenance, the story that is attached to an object, its history, its descent, if you will, has this tendency to gravitate towards the most famous figure with whom it could be associated. And so the livery that we're going to be talking about today was for many years associated with Charles Carroll Barrister of Mount Clare. Krista Green, their executive director, is here with us today. So after the talk, if you really are dying to know more about Mount Clare, she's your go-to on that one. And so I find it really interesting that here we are in 2025. If you go back in the time machine 50 years to 1975, we were on the eve of the bicentennial, and right now we are on the eve of the semi-quincentennial. So at that time, there was a wonderful partnership that was undertaken by the museums of Baltimore. So then it was the Maryland Historical Society, the Baltimore Museum of Art, and the Walters Art Gallery, and they mounted an exhibition called Maryland Heritage, and there was a publication with it. And that's one of the first places that this livery was published. And it was published and exhibited as, here's this really cool, funky suit that's purple with gold trim that was worn by Charles Carroll Barrister. So, like I said about continuing to learn from our collections, my predecessor in this role, Alexandra Deutsch, really, I can attest, she was a year ahead of me in my graduate program, and so going that far back, she had a keen interest in fashion, and so it's not surprising the depth of interest she had in Maryland Center for History and Culture's fashion collections. And so she did a tremendous amount in the more than a decade that she was here in really helping sort of go a deeper dive into our fashion collections. And that culminated in an exhibition that opened in October of 2019 called Spectrum of Fashion. I don't know if any of you attended it. It was really fantastic. Alexandra has moved on, and she is now the Deputy Director of Collections at Winterthur Museum, which will come full circle in a minute. But during the time that she was more intensely working on our fashion collections, she dubbed it the Fashion Archives, and it really is a remarkable repository in terms of what we have in our collection from all time, modern day to things like the livery. But during the time that she was focused on this, she also was able to implement a series of fashion archives interns. And some of them did a much deeper dive into it. So It's important here to credit Emily Bach, who was for a number of years the registrar. She was really fascinated by this livery and did a deeper dive into it, which is also how she published a blog post, which still remains up on our website if you dig for it, which leads me to this other issue of sort of how things change over time. I talked about provenance and trying to figure out the stories and who was the original owner or wearer in this gravitational pull towards the most famous possible association. So Emily, in her learning and work about textiles and fashion, determined that there were some things that were not consistent with it being a 1770s suit worn by Charles Carroll Barrister. And so that also leads to our ability to do research today, and the improvements in that are heavily dependent upon digitization efforts, whether that is digitization of collections like the livery or of our library collections, manuscripts, things like probate inventories and wills, and it's so much more accessible. And I think we're turning our eye towards more inclusive research. So we're also looking better and harder to tell the stories behind an object rather than going for the quick and easy, oh, it belonged to Charles Carroll Barrister. So it's really an exciting time in the field. It's never been unexciting, but this sort of shift in thinking and shift in research direction is really an important thing. And so Alexandra Deutsch, as I said, she's moved on to Winterthur as director of collections. She's still a great friend, and she still curates from this collection in a way. It's an exciting era here as we've become more open to entertaining loan requests and trying to say yes before we immediately say no. And so it leads us into these exciting partnerships, whether it is with the Met, which is a little unanticipated for us, but also because of her familiarity, she regularly requests things from our collection for exhibitions at Winterthur. And so Dr. Square has an exhibition where he's worked with Alexandra Deutsch there called the African American Picture Gallery. I don't know if you plan on talking about that or not. It runs through January 6th, so I would encourage you all to look it up and go see it at Winterthur. It's a quick drive up 95. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to today's speaker. Dr. Jonathan Michael Square is the Assistant Professor of Black Visual Culture at Parsons School of Design. He earned his PhD from New York University, his MA from the University of Texas at Austin, and his BA from Cornell University. Most recently, Square taught at Harvard University's Committee on Degrees in History and Literature and served as a fellow with the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. His curatorial work includes the exhibition Past is Present, Black Artists Respond to the Complicated Histories of Slavery at the Herron School of Art and Design, which closed in January of 2023. He co-curated project Rendering Revolution, an exploration of the visual legacy of the Haitian Revolution through fashion and textile art, and the show African American Picture Gallery at the Winterthur Museum, Garden, and Library. A proponent of the use of social media as a form of radical pedagogy, Dr. Square also leads the Digital Humanities Project, Fashioning the Self in Slavery and Freedom. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Square.
Good morning. How's everyone doing today? I am super excited to be here, and thank you all for sharing this moment with me. It's a Saturday morning. Normally you might be in bed or at some local brunch spot, but thank you for being here and listening to me for an hour. I'm excited to share my research with you all. It's not the first time I've actually spoken at MCHC. I gave another talk here virtually. I forget what year it was. 2021, maybe. Yeah, I think 2021. And I presented the same topic, but the research has exploded since then. So I'm excited to share new developments in the research and get your comments, critiques, etc. I'm going to jump right into it. I first off have to thank Vicki Pass, who is a scholar at MICA, who actually introduced me to the MCHC's collection in many ways. And I also have to evoke Alexandra Deutsch, who couldn't make it. Unfortunately, she's probably only a few miles away because of the marathon. She got stuck in traffic, so. But she's here in spirit. So who's seen Superfine? Who's seen it? Oh, okay. There's a few people who've seen it. If you haven't, you have a few weeks. Check it out. It's worth the trip to New York to see it. And most importantly, the code that you see right now on the screen figures prominently in the exhibition. It's one of the first objects that you encounter when you see Superfine. And just to talk a little bit about the exhibition, Superfine, of course, is an exhibition that explores the history of Black dandyism from the 18th century up into the present day. It's organized into 12 sections, and those 12 sections are inspired in part by an essay by Zora Neale Hurston called Characteristics of Negro Expression, which is separated into 12 parts, and the exhibition is separated into 12 parts. They're not exactly the same categories. The only overlap is juke, which is in the essay and also in the exhibition. But the first section of the exhibition is ownership. In the ownership section, we're exploring not only slavery, but self-possession. And so there are two objects that I'm going to talk about in this talk that are featured in the ownership section. As those who've been to the exhibition know, it consists of both historical objects from the 18th and 19th centuries, but also contemporary fashion that's inspired by those historical objects. So I'm going to jump right into the talk. So I was actually an advisor on Superfine. The exhibition was curated by Monica Miller, who is a scholar at Barnard/Columbia, and she wrote a book called Slaves to Fashion. So the exhibition is based on an academic text, which is unusual for, an exhibition. Like for a text that was written in 2009 to be the jumping off point for an exhibition is really unique. And Monica Miller, like me, focuses on African-American expressive culture, and she grounds her work in history. So the work starts in the 18th century. And the exhibition in particular starts with Equiano, who's a formerly enslaved man. He wrote an autobiography, a memoir. And in this memoir, he makes a reference to the superfine wool that he wear when he gains his freedom. So that's the origins of the name behind the exhibition, Superfine. So Monica Miller, like me, focuses on the 18th and 19th centuries, or at least grounds her work in the 18th and 19th centuries, and brings it up into the present day. And for enslaved people, clothing wasn't trivial. It could be a matter of life and death. And if livery functioned more than just a uniform, it was a way of sort of displaying the wealth and power of an enslaver. It was a visual display of a family's wealth and authority. Often antiquated in style and rich in symbolism, these garments helped enforce social hierarchies and the boundaries between bondage and freedom. One striking example is a coat, waistcoat, and breeches, once thought to belong to Maryland lawyer Charles Carroll Barrister, later revealed to have been worn by an unidentified enslaved man, an object that encapsulates the complex meanings of livery in a slave society. So livery was intentionally designed to be highly visible, ensuring that enslaved individuals wearing it were immediately recognized as property of a wealthy family. The style of livery was often deliberately antiquated to create a clear distinction between those serving and those being served. In the case of the coat, the deep, regal purple velvet was not just a choice of luxury, but a calculated display of wealth. Purple, historically associated with royalty and exclusivity, would have made the enslaved person wearing it an immediate marker of their owner's affluence. The fabric's rich texture and deep hue would have drawn attention to the enslaved individual, turning them into a living symbol of conspicuous consumption. The craftsmanship of the coat further emphasizes this dynamic. The intricate gold trim and buttons running down the front reflecting Arab opulence, with the bright metallic embellishment acting as a visual markers of wealth and power that dictated many aspects of the wearer's life. So this is another shot of the coat. When you first walk into the exhibition, it's one of the first things that you see. Through their clothing, enslaved people were compelled to embody the wealth and power of their enslavers, even as they were denied the freedom and autonomy that such symbols of status might imply. However, the man enslaved by Charles Carroll Barrister likely cut a dashing figure in a purple coat and waistcoat, whose color is one that many, at least in the Western context, associate with regality. The strictures of clothing, though imposed, were not entirely totalizing. Even when forced to wear prescribed garments, enslaved people found ways to assert their individuality and transform these items into something uniquely their own, likely imbuing them with beauty and personal significance. So as you might notice in this installation photo, there's the purple livery that I've been focused on up to this point, but there's also another coat next to it. And I'm going to spend the bulk of this talk talking about this coat. It is a Brooks Brothers coat, which is a brand that, I think many people don't necessarily associate with slavery. I think when people think about Brooks Brothers, they think about all-American, collegiate, preppy fashion. But Brooks Brothers is over 200 years old. It was founded in 1818. And of course, any organization, company that old and that wealthy, over 200 years old, probably has some connection to slavery, and that's the case with Brooks Brothers. I've actually done a lot of research on Brooks Brothers' connection to slavery. So the purple livery from MCHC's collection is displayed alongside a Brooks Brothers livery. There's about a century distance in terms of time. So the purple livery is from the late 18th century. The Brooks Brothers coat is from the 1860s, so we can say roughly the late 19th century. But it's meant to sort of think about not only what enslaved people wore, but also how enslaved people or formerly enslaved people might have asserted their identity despite being made to wear these liveries. So I actually worked on, there was another exhibition, Costume Institute exhibition in 2022, I think was the year. All the years are running together. I think it was 2022. It was Anthology of Fashion. Did anyone see Anthology? Vicki, you didn't see it? I didn't. Well, it was sort of in the wake of the protests in 2020, and then a reevaluation of American fashion. It was two exhibitions that were sort of satellite exhibitions. One was Lexicon of Fashion, which focused on contemporary American fashion, and Anthology was more historically grounded. And it was mounted in the American wing of the Met in the period rooms. And the first room that you encountered when you entered the exhibition was this one. And this room focused in part on presidential fashion. So the first thing you encountered was this coat that was worn by George Washington. And then behind the coat, sort of laying flat because of their condition, were two Brooks Brothers coats. One worn by Abraham Lincoln. Of course, Brooks Brothers is a company that's often associated with the American presidency. And I'm actually going to get to that later in the talk, but most American presidents have been outfitted by Brooks Brothers. But next to it is another Brooks Brothers coat, not the one that's in Superfine, but another coat. They're both from the Historic New Orleans collection, which is a cultural institution in New Orleans. But they were displayed alongside each other. What I like about this installation is that they're sort of put on equal footing, but one coat's worn by an American president, another coat's worn by an enslaved or formerly enslaved man. So I thought the installation was really key. This is another shot of the coat. Also, another great thing about the installation is that they were able to include this sort of screen at the bottom that included more information, more contextual information about the coat. But just to back up a little bit and talk about my research in the broadest sense, I'm interested in enslaved people's dress. And people often ask me just the particulars of my research because people rarely associate slavery with fashion and the fashion system. I think when we think about fashion, we're thinking about creativity, autonomy, democracy, and slavery is the extreme opposite, the antithesis of those things. But of course, enslaved people throughout the US and the Atlantic Basin use fashion to fight for greater freedom and to express their multifarious identities. So how exactly did enslaved people get the clothing that they wore? There are a variety of ways. Commonly, enslaved people received boats of rough cottons and linens, often referred to as Negro cloth. What I'm presenting today is part of a book project that I'm slowly working on, but there's another chapter in this book that's about Negro cloth. Negro cloth was sometimes manufactured in Western Europe, in like places like Wales or in Germany. But Negro cloth was also manufactured, particularly after the American Revolution, in New England, in Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts. And I have a chapter in this book manuscript about Lowell, Massachusetts, which is a textile mill city where a lot of these Negro cloths were produced. So in any case, first bullet point, enslaved people received rough textiles and they were responsible for hand sewing their own clothing. They often used natural dyes to change the colors of these textiles. Enslaved people also worked what was often referred to as provision grounds. Provision grounds were just small plots of land where they were able to grow produce, sort of to augment their diets, but they also sold these produce, and with these small amounts of money, they were able to buy clothing and accessories. They also raised vegetables, poultry, hunted fish, and engaged in artisanal work. There was also a thriving secondhand clothing market in the 18th and 19th centuries. When you look at runaway slave ads, often what the formerly enslaved person, the freedom seeker was wearing is described, but they also describe what they took with them because clothing could serve as a form of currency. So there was a secondhand clothing market, and enslaved people sometimes received cast-offs from their enslavers. But what I will focus on today is this bullet point. Enslaved people, particularly overseers, favorited enslaved persons, productive enslaved people, received fine garments that were manufactured in Europe and in the Northeast, which was the case of the two Brooks Brothers coats that I will focus on today. So as I mentioned, Brooks Brothers is a brand that's associated with the American presidency. And the reason I included this photograph is because this, of course, is Donald Trump's first inauguration. And, you know, Donald Trump and Barack Obama do not have a lot in common. But they are dressed identically in this photo. They're both wearing Brooks Brothers in this photo, and that's not unusual. Many American presidents, most American presidents actually, have been outfitted by Brooks Brothers, particularly on Inauguration Day. And, you know, JFK was wearing Brooks Brothers when he was assassinated. Abraham Lincoln was wearing a Brooks Brothers coat when he was assassinated. So it's a brand that has a long relationship with the American presidency. So this photo is really poignant because it really is their ties, which I imagine is is a reflection of their political affiliations, but otherwise they're wearing the exact same outfit. In thinking about the American presidency, this is a list of all the American presidents that have been outfitted by Brooks Brothers. I'm not going to ask you who's not on the list. I'm not going to give you a pop quiz. But Brooks Brothers was founded in 1818. So the first three presidents weren't able to be outfitted by Brooks Brothers, of course. And Ronald Reagan didn't wear Brooks Brothers. Jimmy Carter, RIP, was very thrifty and didn't wear Brooks Brothers. And Biden is a Brooks Brothers customer, but he didn't wear Brooks Brothers officially. So he actually wore Ralph Lauren, which is another interesting like American brand, which is another talk. But he's more of a Ralph Lauren customer. So also looking at this list, considering my interest in slavery, I wonder if you had to guess how many of these individuals were also enslavers. I'm not going to make you identify each enslaver on this list, but pretty much the first column and a few in the second column were also enslavers. John Quincy Adams was notoriously an abolitionist, so he didn't enslave anyone. But pretty much the 1/3 of American presidents have been enslavers. And that's important because I'm interested in the institution of slavery, but I'm also interested in American institutions like Brooks Brothers. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry to ask a stupid question.
Oh, no.
Do people in Congress wear Brooks Brothers, or is there like a presidential committee that goes up to them when they are elected and they're like, get your Brooks Brothers?
It's a tradition, and it's more Brooks Brothers keeping tabs of this than like politicians. Like it's just good branding for Brooks Brothers. Like Brooks Brothers is a quote unquote legacy brand. Let me put this bottle down. I feel like it's a legacy brand. What they're selling is like the fact that it's been around for over 200 years. It's not a brand that we associate with like innovation or like crazy avant-garde fashion. It's sort of a brand that makes its money because of this legacy. So it's Brooks Brothers keeping tabs of who they're outfitting. It's less of a sort of presidential stylist or a committee that's tracking this history.
Thank you.
But these are the two coats. The one on the right was an anthology, and the one on the left is currently on display in Superfine. They were purchased by a very wealthy man from Maryland, actually, another Maryland connection. I'm just realizing this as I'm giving a talk. But his name was William Newton Mercer. He was born in Baltimore, and he went to University of Pennsylvania and studied medicine and enlisted in the Army and was stationed in New Orleans and later Natchez. And in Natchez, he married into a very wealthy plantation-owning, enslaving family. And this family owned 4 plantations and hundreds of enslaved people. So he was already quite wealthy from birth, but also marrying into this family, but also being a successful doctor, he became sort of astronomically wealthy, sort of in the 1% of enslavers in the American South. I've rifled through his papers, and there was correspondence between him and Abraham Lincoln, so he was that prominent. This is a video that I don't necessarily have to show. It was just a video of the jacket being doing a research visit. But you get a sense of the scale. This particular coat, unlike the other coat, the quote-unquote gray coat, is quite small, so we suspected it was worn by either a child or an adolescent. Having gone through his papers, which are in large part archived at Louisiana State University, some of them are at Tulane, most are at LSU. This is one of the documents that I dug up, and there are actual several documents like this in his papers. So as you know, as I mentioned already, he inherited 4 plantations. And you see here, this is an inventory of enslaved people that's separated into the 4 different plantations. You might notice there's X's and O's next to some names. He was very on top of tracking the behavior of enslaved people, and in some cases formerly enslaved people. And you see here there's a tally, so there's a total number of the enslaved people. What's also really noteworthy about this document is that you see here there's horned cattle, horses, mules, hogs, So livestock were cataloged alongside human beings, just to show you the inhumanity of enslavement. This is the tag inside of one of the coats. It's quite faint, but if you squint, you can see that it says Brooks Brothers, Broadway, Canal Street. Brooks Brothers' second location in Manhattan was on the corner of Broadway and Grand, present-day Soho in New York City. This is a photo of William Newton Mercer. This is from the 1830s. My research focuses on the 1860s, so he would have been older than what you see here in this photo, but this is just to give you a face to put with the name. And this is one of his homes, which is still standing. If you've been to New Orleans, it's on Canal Street. It's now a private men's club that is not open to the public. I would love to see the inside of it. I'm not sure to what extent it's been preserved from the 19th century, but this is the home. And the enslaved boy and man who wore the coat might have worked in this home. The coats, plural, were found in an attic in another plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana, and they were donated to the Historic New Orleans collection. So the coats might have been worn in this home in New Orleans, but he owned several homes. Both were in Mississippi. This is another document from his papers. This is a receipt. William Newton Mercer, as you know, was born in Baltimore, had many connections, both familial and financial, in the Northeast. So he wasn't in favor of secession from the Union, and he spent much of, oh, Alexandra, you made it. He spent much of the Civil War in New York City. And this receipt is from his time in New York City. And I used the magnifying tool to sort of magnify the purchases from Brooks Brothers. This is another paper, another document from his archive, from his papers. As I mentioned, he was very concerned about managing the behavior of enslaved and formerly enslaved people on his plantations. And this document is illustrative of that. So he writes in this document, this letter, which is between him and the man who managed his plantations. He wrote, "I propose to give the medals to Caesar, Ellen, Frank, and perhaps Bessie. They have been perfectly faithful to you, far more than Solomon was when he was here. The medals coming from me would be but little valued, from you greatly." So he's essentially, and this is not written by William Newton Mercer, it's written by Wilbur Shields, which is the man who ran his plantations, but he's basically suggesting that he reward well-behaved enslaved people, and in this case, actually formerly enslaved people, because this document dates from September 20th, 1865. So they were formerly enslaved, but they are being treated as if they were enslaved people. And this is important because fashion and accessories were used to manage behavior on plantations, or in this case, farmer plantation societies. This is another example of that. I found a number of examples that illustrate this point, but this is an example, a newspaper article that dates from 1898, and it's a feature about a formerly enslaved man whose name was Peter Fawcett, and he worked in Thomas Jefferson's Monticello when he was a small child. The Fawcett family was similar to the Hemings family in that they often worked in close proximity to the Jefferson family. The Hemings family, of course, were genetically related to the Jefferson family. The Fawcetts were not. But he, as you can see in this image here, he describes being dressed better than other plantation boys because he wasn't engaged in agricultural labor. He worked mainly as a valet and butler and coach person. But back to the coats. One curious detail about the coats is that, and this is not that unusual for livery, but the buttons are custom. So when you look, this is a closer shot. There's little falcons on each of the buttons. And it's not unusual for livery to sort of have a symbol or emblem to reflect the family that the enslaved person or whether they were enslaved or not, the coat often reflected. And actually what I'm wearing now actually is kind of like the buttons would sort of have an emblem that reflected either a crest or some emblem that reflected the family's history or wealth. So enslaved bodies were used to display, were emblazoned with symbols of the family's wealth and legacy. And this is another object that's part of the Historic New Orleans collection that's from the Mercer estate. And it's a silver tray, and it also has an M for Mercer and a falcon to reflect the falcon that's on the Mercer crest. And there's another Baltimore connection here. Another example is Hampton Mansion, which Nora Worthington has written about. But Tillman Davis and Thomas Brown, two formerly enslaved men, wore a coat, and as you can see, there's a stag on the coat, again reflecting a symbol associated with the family that had formerly enslaved them. And again, if you go to Hampton Mansion, you see the stag is throughout the estate, whether it's a tieback for a velvet curtain, or on stationery, on porcelain, etc. But going back to Brooks Brothers and its connection to slavery, this is a image of the first Brooks Brothers location, which is downtown Manhattan, but on Catherine and Cherry Streets. That's an important location because of its location in close proximity to ports. Also, its proximity to slave ports, even though by the time Brooks Brothers was founded in 1818, New York State had already passed gradual emancipation laws, and most people of African descent in New York City were either free or in the process of gaining their freedom. People often refer to as Brooks Brothers as being a slop shop in the 19th century, which is a place where you'd get like bargain barrel menswear. I don't think that's quite the right term. I think of Brooks Brothers as being the men's warehouse of the 19th century. It was the place where you could get a wide range of suiting that went from affordable to expensive. So if you go to a men's warehouse with $100, you can probably buy some kind of suit. You can also spend $5,000 at Men's Warehouse. And Brooks Brothers was very similar. But even by the mid-19th century, it was a brand that had become associated with the elite. In thinking about the 1865 draft riots, it was one of the targets by protesters. They targeted Brooks Brothers because of its association with the elite. This is just a screenshot of Google Maps so you can see the location of the first Brooks Brothers. The first location was on Catherine and Cherry Streets in a bustling sort of commercial district. The second location, as you saw on the tag, was on Broadway and Grand. The third location was sort of in the Union Square area. There was a Flatiron District, and of course, presently, there's a number of Brooks Brothers locations throughout the world, in the United States, and throughout Manhattan. Another document that I've analyzed in my research is this tailor's appeal. So a number of firms took out an ad in like Philadelphia and New York City newspapers, and they complained that Southern work employers, a euphemism for enslavers, weren't paying their bills on time. And so below this tailor's appeal, they have a list of firms that sign this tailor's appeal. One of them is Brooks Brothers, which, let's see, right here, number 29. So this is just another smoking gun document, one obvious connection between Brooks Brothers and the history of slavery. I've done a lot of research on this document. Most of these firms no longer exist. The few that do exist is Brown Brothers, which is a famous bank. There's been a lot of scholarship on Brown Brothers and their connection to slavery. And there's another firm here called Lewitt Lees and Company, which is now an investment banking and brokerage firm called Laidlaw and Company. Another, right above Brooks Brothers, is another firm called Rogers & Co. And Rogers & Co. eventually became Rogers Peet, which is now a defunct menswear brand. I think it folded in the 1980s. But the rest of these firms, as far as I know, no longer exist. I also want to talk about Brooks Brothers Archive, which I think is really interesting. Their archive is managed by a corporate archive management firm called the History Factory that's based in DC. And this firm is very protective of Brooks Brothers' legacy because, again, this is what we associate with. It's a legacy brand. It's over 200 years old. So they're very protective of the archive and who has access to it. They don't want scholars digging around and, exposing their connection to slavery. And this is a recent report by the History Factory, which I think is really telling about the way they approach managing these histories. This is a sort of the hero image for the report, which was posted online. And you see on the right is an image of women probably from the 60s or 70s advocating for equal pay. You see polluting smokestacks on the left. And in the middle, you see a line drawing of a 19th century slave ship. And the title of it is Perils of the Past. So the History Factory, their way of sort of grappling with this history is just to sweep it under the rug, which is, I think, not the right approach. But I haven't been able to have access to the archive for this reason, because they're very protective of Brooks Brothers' legacy. So Brooks Brothers is fully embedded in American history, which include the most American of institutions, slavery. The success and longevity of Brooks Brothers is due in part to its connection to slavery and the profits it gained from selling clothing to enslavers in the South. By counting enslavers among its clientele, Brooks Brothers directly benefited from the buying and selling of enslaved men, women, and children. So one thing I want to do is connect this research to a current exhibition that I curated at Winterthur. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I met Alexandra Deutsch when I gave a talk here, I think in 2021. No.
We met in 18, I think, because of the Livery.
Oh, okay. I told you the years are running together. And we've maintained a professional relationship since then. And thanks to Alexandra, I've been able to curate an exhibition at Winterthur, which is called Almost Unknown, the African American Picture Gallery. In some ways, separate from this research, but in many ways, some of the same themes that I talked about in this presentation, I also explore in this exhibition at Winterthur. The exhibition is based on a 19th century essay that was written in 1859 by a free African-American man named William J. Wilson. And in this essay, he's envisioning how an African-American museum might look in the future. And the essay starts off quite linear, where he is literally describing each object that you'll encounter in this imagined gallery and numbers them. Midway through the essay, it becomes more fantastical, almost Afrofuturistic. And so I wanted to recreate the experience of a 19th century text and reading that text in the exhibition, using in large part Winterthur's collection, though there is one piece from MCHC. So So each room in the exhibition has its own vibe. One room feels like a 19th century parlor. There's one room that's meant to sort of recreate the experience of being in the Underground Railroad. There's another room that's more sort of a 19th century decadent Mount Vernon. So the exhibition is very experiential. It really does consider all the senses. There's sound, there's color, there's lighting. It's often described as like a sort of intellectual funhouse for people who are into really nerdy about African American history. So I highly suggest you see my exhibition. You should see Superfine. See Superfine is only up for a few more weeks, but also African American Picture Gallery is up until January 4th. So please do go to Winterthur, see my exhibition. And this is the last slide. So my exhibition, Almost Unknown, the African American Picture Gallery, like the research presented today, revisits archives and collections to recover Blackness in places where it was rendered invisible. Brooks Brothers' complicity in slavery exemplifies the very contradictions Almost Unknown confronts, how American refinement and brutality are intimately linked. Both the research presented today and my exhibition expose how Black history is woven into the fabric of American identity. Thank you very much.